This morning, the FNL News Hour moves to Bologna, one of the major cities of Italy. We have a very outstanding visitor today, Professor Romano Prodi. Probably it's fair to say he's one of the first citizens of Europe. And you could say that because of his experience as the 10th head of the European Commission, Prime Minister on two occasions, 1996 to 1998, and from 2006 to 2008. And Ban Ki-moon from the UN appointed him as the African Union representative for the peacekeeping force, and he's also been involved as a special envoy for the Sahel. And he's a professor, and interestingly, he's an author. So, Romano Prodi, thank you very much for joining FNL News.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much indeed. It's sometimes said that you were effectively the first Prime Minister of the European Union. What's your feeling on that?
Well, I'm flattered, but it's not true, because there were strong European Union. I have to tell you that after my time, the European Union has changed, because the main change is that the power moved from the Commission to the Member States. And second, from some sort of equilibrium among member states to a dominant Germany. So it's really a different European Union. I don't say that it's worse or better, but it's totally different. You know.
So subsidiarity became a key element.
Subsidiarity, but subsidiarity does not mean that no, subsidiarity means that you do things at the level of the countries, and the theory is subsidiarity. But in real terms, you have the weight of the strong country that is dominating Europe, you know. Also because I have to be frank, what I call the UK suicide is a strong terminology, but you know that when I was president of the Commission, the balance among the states was very interesting, you know. Germany, France, and UK, they were in some way balancing, you know. And UK power was much stronger than everybody thinks. When I was appointed president of the Commission, I thought to go to Brussels dominated by German and French bureaucracy. Not true. The British, first of all, they were first class. Second, so united, you know. Among my collaborators, I immediately understood whether an Italian, a French, or German was Christian Democratic or Socialist. Among my British collaborators, I don't even know now whether they were in favor of Labour or Conservative. And so the strength was so much. But when Cameron declared to have a referendum, the power was lost. All the countries that were balancing, you know, a bit of UK, a bit of Germany, a bit of France, because of the French, let's say, diminishing power. And the UK, what I call suicide, or in any case, departure, only German umbrella remained. And all now are going under the German umbrella. That is clear, it is natural, you know.
Well, we'll come to Brexit, because clearly that's very important. I should say, of course, we've also got Andrea Giardini here from the Studio Zunarelli, and very much a law firm in Italy and in Bologna here. So we'll maybe discuss with you in a moment or two some of the other issues affecting Africa. But I would like to go on perhaps a little bit firstly to your visit to China, because when you were Prime Minister, you went to China, I believe, and you said Italy should be the gateway to Europe. And do you still think that is true? And perhaps with the Chinese innovation in the Silk Route now, and the 8 to 10 trillion US dollars they're spending reinvigorating the Silk Route, maybe this was your starting strategy.
Look, when I was Prime Minister, we worked a lot to launch the South Italy ports, let's say Gioia Tauro and Taranto. And we had good agreement with the Chinese companies, but we lost time to adapt to the harbors. So the Chinese decided to go to Piraeus. They stay in Italy also, you know, they are in Naples, they are in Genoa, they are everywhere. But to, let's say, to buy a big chunk of Piraeus. And so now I think that the South Italian port, they must work hard to regain market. But the Northern Adriatic and the North Tyrrhenian ports, they are close to the German, Austrian, Central, not only to the European, Italian market, but to the, and this is a fantastic asset. If I repeat, if we are able to exploit, you know, because now, as you know, you have to shorten the trip, you know, and so to be close to the market is very...
So, presumably for Central and Eastern Europe, you'd be better using Trieste, Koper, Genoa, rather than the 5 days round to Rotterdam, Hamburg or Bremerhaven.
But you have to be organized, you know. And, you know, you asked me, in the last years I was at least in a couple of meetings, and I tried to study deeply the Silk Road, Obor, you know. And let us be clear, it's very important, but the percentage of the traffic by rail cannot be maximum 5%. It is good, you know, but I say maximum, you know, because you have to cross state to change the rail coach, and then very sensible to political tensions, to all this problem, you know. So the fantastic proposal of the Chinese for the Silk Road is both a link to Europe, but I don't say in a minor, but anyway, but mainly is a regional, Chinese regional policy towards Central Asia, you know, to, let's say, and you have now, very interesting, you know, Pakistan, Iran, and all these countries are moving and investing in infrastructure, you know.
But do you think this has been the right decision of the Chinese to spend this kind of, through the stands and to Europe? Do you think this is the good way forward?
The flow between Asia and China and Europe is now the most important in the world, you know, and is growing more. So investing in this for China is investing in the future, you know. And then politically is very, very important, you know, because you have the Turkish influence from one side, the Russian influence from the other side. So this message is giving China a lot of let's say, movement, you know, a lot of clearly is done also in answer to the American proposal for the Pacific Treaty, excluding China, with the difficulties of the Atlantic Treaty. So China is moving and accompanying, don't forget that is accompanying it with the let's say, investment bank,
the infrastructure bank,
infrastructure investment bank. That is so.
In Italy, is a shareholder in the infrastructure bank?
Yes. Well, you know, when UK decided to be shareholder against the American will, of course, Italy, France, and Germany, we rushed it, you know, because it was the signal that it was impossible to stay out. This is my interpretation, even if I was not part of the decision. But I repeat, you have the very expensive traffic through airplanes. You may have from 3 to 5% by rail, in 95, 97%.
And you see the sea continuing. You don't see a diminution of that.
No. Well, even if you don't build infrastructure to shorten the way and pass through the peninsula in Asia, even in the existing condition, the cost of sea is, well, much less than half that cost by train.
Will it be good for the stands? Is this going to see a bigger investment in the stand states with the Silk Route development? Is this going to be good for European business in these countries?
In which country, sorry?
In the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan?
Oh, yes, because in some way they are in the middle of this new traffic that, in spite of the limit, will be a huge traffic, a very huge traffic. And so Europe will be better off, also because, you know, we talk about the Silk Road, but there are 3 main Silk Roads, you know, by land, you know, south, medium, and the Russian one, you know. Clearly, each one with advantage and disadvantage. The advantage of the south is that, in theory, is more direct.
Well, the North Sea route clearly is a possibility, but there are political issues with the Russians if they take the route around the north.
Well, it depends. Now we are making a policy that is pushing Russia and China together, you know.
Yeah, quite. Well, that's another conversation.
Yeah, but...
Well, and you think that's a real concern?
Well, I think it's difficult, but we do our best to make it possible. We are doing our best, you know.
Well, I think I'd like to go back a little bit to your academic side, because you were chairman of the Sino-European Dialogue at the China-Europe Business School. Do you see academia playing quite a big role in the future of global relations?
Yes, it's absolutely important. The number of exchange of student, professor, academician societies is increasing, you know. But you mentioned China and Europe. Now the link is China-US, you know. There is a Freudian love and hate, but compared to Europe, the link of scientists is with the United States, you know. And I'm sorry to tell you that, but I was teaching in China 6 years, till last November. And in the first year, all the students were anxious to have seminars about Europe. In the last year, nobody...
Really?
Yes. Well, because, you know, it's young people, they feel where the power, where things are. And this is my...
So you feel...
Maybe, look,
all the China and Russia on one hand,
all,
and we've got China
all the
and
personal
States on the
experience
yes.
are limited, you know. But I tell you, my students, they were pushing me, Professor Europe, the last years, you know. I like to have a more general picture with the China-US relations, which will be the role of US, Pacific policy, and economic, of course.
And even with a possible President Trump?
Sorry?
Even with a possible President Trump?
No, I ended my teaching when Trump was not in the air, you know. But I don't think that the Chinese will dislike Trump, you know. Why should they dislike Trump?
We wait and see.
Because they wait
but
and see.
It's quite interesting. In Japan, you got the Order of the Rising Sun. What did you do to deserve that?
It was an old story, because when I was, don't forget that I am more than a century old, you know, and when I started my teaching in industrial economics, Japan was really the most interesting country, you know. And I had many exchanges with, in that time, our powerful MITI, the Minister of Industry, and we worked well together. And it was a time in which the dynamism of the applied industry was Japan. If you think even in shipping, even in, you know, in what you are more interested, it was Japan. And
well, it was the UK originally, and then it was Japan for shipbuilding. But
yes.
that was a little while ago.
No, but I say during my life, the rising, if you take, I start teaching in 64, you know, 65, let's say, and you had the Japanese period, then the period of American domination, then this Chinese rising, you know, in half century you have a lot of different development, you know, and I was really going up and down to Japan to try to analyze what was happening, you know, and I mean the last 20 years, because of demographic, because other problem, Japan is not anymore the old Japan, but we have still a lot of things to learn.
It's still, what, the third biggest economy?
Yeah, and of course it's the real strange, as well now as an economist, you know, if you ask me which is the country in the world that is #1, not in science, United States is that, but in translating science to things,
yes,
is South Korea now.
Yes, of course.
It's not anymore Japan, it's not, of course, China, even if they produce. But if you think 50 million country, 50 million people country, they are leading in so many important sectors, you know.
We could spend the whole conversation on the Far East with North Korea and all these questions.
But you made me the question, you know,
yes,
it's not my fault. I answered it.
Yeah, but you've got so many exciting things you're telling us. I mean, if you look at, I mean, obviously North Korea is a separate conversation, but if we look at ASEAN, what does ASEAN do that the Commission in Brussels does not do? Or is there a common link between ASEAN and the European Union?
No, the European Union was an economic and political, let's say, goal. The Asia now is economic dominated, but of course with political consequence. But you have not the idea of, let's say, free circulation of people, what is obsessing you, British, you know, or things like this, you know. There is no idea to have an Asian political community.
There isn't, no.
Well, in the future maybe, but now
it's mainly economic.
The attention is, the focus is economics, you know, and I think that the Asian difference are even deeper than the European one.
Really?
Well, of course, you know, because you have race, religion, histories that are so different, you know. In Europe, we always fight each other, but with the same roots, you know, with the same roots, you know. The stupidity of history made us fighting, you know, but...
Well, I mean, we'll come to that as well, but perhaps you would like to lead off with another question?
Yeah. To build on your last answer, you often say in your interviews that European member states must stay united in this globalization era, otherwise we will face the dissolution of Europe as compared to the development of US and China. In your opinion, what steps should be taken in this current scenario in order to achieve such an union?
First of all, what I always say to the students, you know, I always go making sermons around, you know, because this is my job now. I say, look, the Italian states in the Renaissance, they were leading in the world. science, technology, banking, Genoa, Milan, Rome, Florence, you know. And there was the first globalization, the discovery of America. No Italian state was able to build the new caravels necessary for the new traffic. We did this together, and Italy disappeared from the world map for 4 centuries. Europe is in the same situation. Germany, Italy, France, you know, nobody of us is building the new caravels. Which are the new caravels? Google, Apple, eBay, Alibaba, all Chinese and all Americans. And we are lost if we don't stay together and we don't build the new caravels. We are lost. This is my clear opinion, you know, because the dimension is so different, you know.
Well, it's interesting, in fact, Mr. Prodi did say in another speech, I noticed, that if France and Germany and UK do not, I think it was Charlie Rose, if France, UK and Germany don't stay together, they will disappear. I think these were your words. You really are concerned that this is the case?
When I was president of the Commission, I was really taken by GPS. Because then when there were the Balkan Wars, the Americans, for good reason, they were in some way organizing GPS for military purposes, and we were, you know. And so I said, look, we need a European GPS. Nothing to do. The American pressure, the British, they said, this costs too much. Then I had an agreement with the Chinese and the Russians, like us big GPS, you pay and we give technology. So it was fantastic. Now, because of military, okay. But this is a suicide. But you need a political common action to do that. You know, you cannot do a piece of this, the other of it. And but we are losing the appointment with history. I'm convinced about it.
Very important.
And so I am sorry to tell you that probably my Chinese students, they were right.
And
well, carry on. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it is how it is.
You asked me, and I tell what I think.
Yeah, exactly.
And another question. In the past, you supported the establishment of a Mediterranean bank. What was your thinking behind this? And do you think that it would have helped to defuse the Greek crisis?
Of course. But it was a similar case, you know. When I was traveling through the South Mediterranean countries, they were the period of enlargement. The Egyptian, let's say, old Mubarak or Gaddafi or the Tunisian leader, they all were telling me, look, you Europeans are only looking at north or northeast. And my answer was honest. I said, look, we have an emergency, the end of the Soviet Union and the adaptation of the world, but then we shall make a Mediterranean policy. Then I proposed 2 things. Well, a big plan for the South Mediterranean, some sort of Marshall Plan, but it was too much. Then I said, look, let us do 2 things. The Mediterranean Bank, with the same number of members of the board, south and north, collecting money from the Gulf, from everywhere. And second, mixed universities, with, let's say, 1/2 in Naples, 1/2 in Tunisia, 4th university, with the same number of students from the north, same number for the south, teachers the same, in order to have, you know, and mainly the North European countries, they said, no, it's money wasted. We have already the European Investment Bank that is working well. But one thing is politically a European Bank investing in South. One other thing is to have a common joint venture, you know. And I don't think that the Arab Spring would have been different, but maybe
the Greek crisis may not have been as severe.
And the Arab Spring, probably you had, let's say, some thousand of young students that they were familiar to know the South. And we have to do it now. We have to do it now.
So this is a must now.
It's a must now, you know. It's if you look how the Mediterranean ports will be linked, you know, close to Suez Canal, Spain, Italy, Greece, you know, Algeria, and so. If we don't have one system, we shall never solve the problem of our security and peace.
Well, that brings us on to other. Well, actually, let's go there now, if I might suggest. You say a lot in this excellent book, Europe as I See It, Romano Prodi. Very, very good book, and I would recommend it.
It's already old.
Well, yes, it's old, but I think I've got several questions from it. I actually looked at it. If we had had this book in the UK, well understood, with its motivations and its clear vision, it's a very thoughtful book.
But it's written in English, yeah?
I know it is, and it's even part of it's published in the UK, I noticed. But the point is, most people in the UK were not aware of the messages that you were communicating in this book. If they had been, I doubt we would have had the referendum result that we had. The campaign did not discuss the issues in the way you describe it here. I think there was two concerns in the UK. One was there's a regular reference here to a European defence policy, whereas the UK is very strongly a NATO, and you're a supporter of NATO too. But so I think that was one coming out, a European defence force and a common European foreign policy. But what do you feel about what people were fed in the UK about the referendum? Did they get the right facts? And secondly, you have a strong vision of a common defence policy here. Do you still hold true on that?
Look, I should have liked to be reappointed President of the European Commission. I was not reappointed because of the idea of this book.
Really?
Be clear, you know, because it was, you know, this is going too far, you know, and I had also, let's say, not certainly a backing from the British government.
Really?
You know, that was center-left, like I was in that moment. But
the Olive Tree Coalition.
But yeah. The idea they were not sharing. And now, look, I was very sorry for the Brexit because, well, first of all, because I was betting for the Remain, but anyway. But also because this is a message to the world. Let us omit for a moment the economic damage that will come. But look, European Union from India, Commonwealth countries, United States, you know, European Union was examined with British glasses. And now there is not anymore Britain, you know, and clearly it's a step back. It's a step
both
back.
For UK and for Europe.
You know, from the economic point of view, I think that is worse for UK. But from political point of view, it's also for us a loss, you know, in the sense that you have not anymore the image of something, of the rising sun. You have a sense of the limit, you know. And this is why I told you, joking but not joking, that the Chinese students, they were understanding the world, you know. They were seeing in the moment a rising sun, and now they say, look, what do the Europeans do?
So it's a lost opportunity.
And that opportunity. So, look, Maybe I am wrong. Maybe somebody thinks that is big enough to participate to the new world oligopoly, let us call it. Maybe Germany thinks that with some sort of help with the neighbor states, you know, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, so they could be strong enough for the world competition, but the big projects, they jump in the dimension of science. This cannot be done if you are not
together.
500 million people
Presumably
like we
Mrs.
are.
Merkel wanted the balance of the British and the European Union. She wanted that balance, not to be left on her own as a superpower.
Yeah, look, I think that it was important to have UK in, even if, frankly speaking, day by day, I was really always mediating between UK and the other countries, you know. Anything that was on the table was followed by a British exception. And because of the value of Britain, I always try to accommodate this. But there is a moment in which you have a breaking point. And I hope that time was playing in favor of a glue.
But it's interesting, you clearly state in the book, and I found it fascinating, you've got the four cultures, the Germanic culture, the Latin culture, the Anglo-Saxon culture, and the Slav culture. In hindsight, would the pace of European development, if it had been slightly slower to embrace these cultures, might we have avoided some of these problems? Might.
Maybe, but you know, the problem is that we are still immature to appreciate the diversity. You know, it's, even if there are, I repeat, common European roots, you know, it's, and this is why I repeat, it will not be easy that the Russian-Chinese, let's say, link can go on forever, you know, but. And probably it was because of history. It was some sort of utopia, my one, you know, maybe. But I insist because it's the only safety belt that we have.
But if looking back, if you were writing this book again today, would you change many of the chapters, or would you really keep this still as the template for the future?
No, but the goals are the same. I should add, you know, a note. Romano, we have lost.
Well, I hope we have.
A footnote, you know. But I think that, you know, the fate of history is the same, you know. It's,
you do.
And
did you ever meet John Major when he was Prime Minister?
I tell you, I liked it.
I was going to say, because he was very well briefed on the Maastricht Treaty, is that correct? He really knew what he was doing.
Look, I tell you a story that I never told to anybody, you know. When he left, you know, I called him because I found easy, you know, to talk with him. I called him, I said, look, John, I am sorry that you left, but I have to ask you why, in a very tough moment, you defended the British interests, but then you understood the situation and in some way you were mediating wisely. He told me, I am so happy that you understood that, because nobody did. I said, look. And he told me, I did it because I have to protect British interests, but I cannot stop the evolution of others that in some way will not damage our interests, you know. Then it was funny because he added, Romano, you know what I am doing now? You know what is a former prime minister? I said, no, well, I am packaging my books. I go down to the stairs in Downing Street. There is the black limousine. I open the back door. I enter, I sit down, I close the door, and nothing happens. It was just humorous when he left, you know, so that's...
Well, I mean, we had a lot of very good politicians who were probably putting, as you do, putting country before personal interest, and that is one of the things.
The following British policy probably was not understanding the necessity of buying time, you know, of patience, you know. The referendum is the end of patience.
That's an interesting term, the end of patience. But referendum's not a good thing anyway, is it?
Maybe,
not for a complex
maybe
issue.
necessary, maybe indispensable, but it's the end of patience. Let's say yes or no. And if you are obliged, yes. But it was if you are obliged by constitution, if you are obliged. But if it's a political choice, you know, it's you know, history is never yes or no in one moment. History is adapting. History is.
Well, okay. Perhaps it's an interesting time to look at some of the sort of leaders in your time. I mean, how the late Shimon Peres made a wonderful speech at the Ambrosetti Institute early September here in Italy.
Who?
Shimon Peres, the former president of Israel.
Ah, yeah, Peres, yes, yes.
And he made a wonderful speech, literally the beginning of September this year. And he said, I'm surrounded by negativity. And he said, there's a lot to be optimistic about. He said, since the Second World War, income has gone up times 15. Look at China 50 years ago, look at China today. As a percentage of world population, malnutrition is reducing. He said there's lots of positive things out there, not all negative. Would you share that view?
Oh, look, of course I am optimist by definition. You have to be because you have to live. But as Peres in the last years, I knew him very well. I admired him. He was optimist, but it was impossible for him, even for him, to build optimism.
Really?
Yeah, because the policy, even in his country, it was not in his hands, you know. And so, in the last year he was, let's say, a testimony, let's say, a living demonstration of faith, of optimism. But politically, the problem is that you need leaders that put themselves in danger because of a goal, you know, and they have the strength. And he was not prime minister, he was president of the republic, you know. So it was, in the last year he was fantastic intellectual, but less a politician.
He was he prime minister when you were prime minister the first time? He was prime minister of Israel for 2 years.
I was, I knew him at least since 20 years, you know, so and there were the moment in which he was really, let's say, being strong in even international policy. Not this year, you know, no. But I think he was really testifying where humanity should go. You know,
well, you quote in the book John Paul II, and I think you were saying that he made various statements that Christianity and Europe were synonymous one with the other, and that presumably Europe and Christianity have a responsibility somehow to accommodate other cultures.
Look, it was not an easy problem for me because personally I'm deeply Catholic, but I told many times that it was impossible to put the Christian roots at the first chapter of the European Constitution, simply because it was impossible for the French and Belgian Constitution, you know. So, and I tried to tell, look, this is not so important, you know, because to write this in the past, the problem is the future. I make these roots living, you know, and working. And then in the project Constitution, we inserted a chapter, I remember 51, or, you know, in which there is an active role for the future of the Christian churches, Catholic, Protestant, you know, this must be, let's say, consulted regularly, and the Constitution was filed. But because I was thinking that because of the terrible fighting of the past, if you want to build Europe, you have to think to the future. And even in this problem, I insisted, let us think to the future, not to the past.
But if we've got, moving from there, of course, we've got to deal with the different cultures and the Islamic State and the Middle Eastern conflicts. I presume you were satisfied that the right decision to remove sanctions from Iran because of the nuclear program. I assume you supported that decision of the United States?
Because it was done because of an agreement. When you can put off sanction because of an agreement, you must be happy.
Yes.
You know, then now it's not implemented so.
So how do we deal with Russia then in the same context?
Look, generally speaking, look, with the sanction and with any political action, you must decide not because of theology, but because of practical results. I see now Russia much more far from Europe and much more looking to East. And I think that in the long run is not positive. My idea, well, when in the last conference I did with Putin when I was president of the Commission, a journalist asked me, will be Russia member of the European Union?
Yes.
I said, no, of course. First of all, because it's too big. Second, because you should have two capitals, one in Moscow, one in Brussels, you know. But we are like whiskey and soda. And Putin corrected me and told vodka and caviar. But anyway, let us...
A good example. Yeah.
Because I do think that Russia cannot develop without being linked with an industrial big entity like Europe or China.
Or China. And your suspicion at the moment is China?
Well, of course. How can you get married or fiancé with somebody that brings you sanctions? You know, and in the long run, I do think this is a mistake.
Turkey. With the UK coming out, do you ever see Turkey coming into the European Union?
Too late.
Too late.
When the negotiations were opened, I told, look, I am happy, but I told to my Turkish friends, please, we need 30 years, you know, because history is. And I do remember that when the Turkish television interviewed me, and they asked why you have been open and you say 30 years. Well, I told because when there was something frightening, my grandmother used to say Mamma li Turchi, mother the Turks, because of history. And so we have to adapt this, you know. And in the beginning, Europe was slamming the door to Turkey, and instead of going slowly, but always in the right direction. And then the war changed. Turkey has become a big regional power, and I don't see Turkey discussing foreign policy with 28 European states. You know, now we have only to build strong, friendly relations. I think that the option of membership may be backed by the Turkish government, but is not in the air. You know, it's not in the air because of simply different way of deciding, different way of, but I remember that I do think that we have to go back to my old proposal for European Union, that all, let's say, neighbor states, from Belarus to Syria, to Israel, till Morocco, they have the possibility of entering in what I was calling the ring of friends, or everything but institution. Let's say, to deal with Europe, negotiation in all the fields, one by one, of course, you know, not being member of the European Union. This, in my opinion, was an historical, bearable compromise between enlargement and fighting. You know, it's so I think that we have to go back to that idea. But now, you know, with Libya, Syria, is a problem of tomorrow, not of today.
But the European Union has to find its way of dealing in the future, as you were saying. How does it achieve this?
Look, in this moment I am happy if the European Union is able to deal with the present, because the future is not in the agenda, you know. It's sorry to tell that.
I'm sorry too. Would you like to?
Yeah, to remain on the future of Europe, given your former responsibilities in Africa with the UN peacekeeping panel and with Sahel, what is Europe's job now towards Africa?
There is a returning idea of a big Marshall Plan, let us call it this way, for Africa. But there was never an agreement for the policy and for the dimension, the economic dimension, because Africa does not need aid, needs investments. Investments and investments. If you think that now the Africa worker remittance are bigger than the helps, you know, you have an idea of the change, you know. So we have to involve Africa in there. But Europe is not united, you know. The African policy in the French-speaking countries is done by France, and the English-speaking is done by Britain, you know. Even when I was President of the Commission, when there was a trouble in some country, we were using to delegate to the familiar country to lead, you know. But if we don't overcome that, you know, we shall never, you know, the only African policy is Chinese. They have diplomatic relation with 50 or 51, I am not, on 54 African countries. And for China to have diplomatic relation means that the country must break up with Taiwan, means a lot of conditions, so means a direct involvement, you know. So if I see a Chinese African policy, I don't see a European African policy.
And should Europe encourage the local development
of course,
Africa? Yeah.
Of course. Investment also for our advantage, you know, this is a new market. You know, you have a European country that in any case will lose 20 million people before the middle of the century, or 30 million people. You know. Africa will pass from 1 billion to 2 billion and something. You know. The median age of Italy is 46, 47 years. In the Sahel is 17, 18. We understand history or not, you know.
If you look at Italy's African role with Ethiopia, Italy did a lot of very good work culturally and physically in Ethiopia. Do you think that Africa, or that country in particular, has lost out since Italy is no longer the big influence?
Well, I think that yes, in the sense that good relations were important for Italy and for Ethiopia, or even Eritrea. You know, if I go to Ethiopia, Eritrea, only people older than 65 years, they speak Italian. But the young generation, we completely lost it. And but this is because of, let's say, of international great power play and Italian weakness, you know, in the sense that the sense of a continuity of foreign policy was lost in this country, you know. And but I do think that with a very, let's say, focused policy with the Horn of Africa and Libya, we could in some way, let's say, make positive action in Africa.
Mm. So we have a whole, just before we sort of summarize then, going back to your time, you were Prime Minister on 2 occasions. The first time, was it more fun than the second time? And then the second time was easier than the first time because you had the experience?
No. The first one was better in any sense. There was a feeling of a change, there was a spirit, and the results were good, you know. In both cases, I diminished the external debt. I was the only one to 12 points down, you know. It's the debt GDP ratio. But the first time there was an idea, there was a real popular. The second time it was always a mediation among parties, you know. I had more experience, but it was not fun. When every morning you have to deal. So I could teach now science of coalitions, you know, in any university of the world, but it is not a good teaching.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, in the UK, the first Cameron government in coalition with the Liberal Democrats actually was quite successful.
Yeah, but only 2 parties, you know, I had 12.
Oh, okay, all right.
So this is a child.
I suppose, yes, I suppose. I mean, there's so many questions. How many, looking back now in your wonderful career, because it is a career of great distinction, who are the leaders that you're saying, gosh, you know, I'm apart from yourself, because you couldn't say that about yourself, but who were the leaders that stand out to you in experience?
If you look, if I think to my 10 G8 in which I've taken part, 5 as Italian Prime Minister, 5 President of the European Commission, I have to say Clinton was, because it was not only intelligent with the dossier, because many are, but it was absolutely able to aggregate people, you know. So from this point of view, on Europe, I had a very strong link with Kohl and Chirac, you know, in a different way, you know, but when he had international missions, Lebanon, it was so important, and Albania, when the country was both successful, you know. Chirac, he didn't think only to France. He was thinking to the cooperation, to the results, you know. And Kohl, in the European policy, he was understanding the problem. You know, when you are leader and you want to be leader, you must put yourself in the shoes of everybody else, you know. Look, when the Americans won the Second World War, they did the Marshall Plan, not because they were a charity institution.
Well, they weren't, because we paid back an awful lot of money.
No, but also because they needed strong, powerful, and wealthy allies. And Kohl, in some way, was understanding that, you know, and understanding that to build Europe, you should need also to make sacrifice, you know. And I remember a conversation in which he was telling me, Romano, when I was pushing, you know, telling him, look, we cannot have the euro without a common taxation policy, you know, at least for the companies, you know, because, and he was answering, you know that Rome was not done in one day, you know, and step by step we shall do it. And remember, my German citizen, my electors, they didn't want to abandon the Deutschmark. They didn't want the euro. But I want the euro, and this is fantastic, because my brother died in the Second World War.
Really?
He didn't put me any, and then he told, look, and then he repeated the famous sentence, I want a European Germany, not a German Europe. But anyway, but the substance say, look, this is the sense of history, you know. I want the euro because my brother died during the war, you know. And when now I go to the students to talk about history of Europe, the wars, you know, nobody cares. Peace is granted. And that is a mistake. Believe me, it's a mistake.
Well, it's interesting. My younger daughter was doing a project for her university thesis on NATO and Kosovo. So I christened it, In the Light of the Kosovo Crisis, has NATO correctly redefined its objectives? So anyway, I took her to NATO. She didn't think that was possible. And I said, we just get in a plane and we fly to Brussels. But the briefing we had from NATO was fantastic. And at lunch, I said, look, there's Ukrainians, there's Hungarians. We were briefed by a Polish officer on NATO policy. She said, but they've got to have lunch. I said, yes, Eloise, but these countries would not have been in the same room 10 years ago as they are today. But her generation couldn't understand that, you know?
This makes me afraid, you know. This is why I have always thought that Europe was a long-range effort, but that we should have progressed step by step, you know, and in 50 years or even more, build it. Now we are turning. This is the difference, you know. And Brexit is part of it. The other part is, let's say, the East European states that are refusing the sense of belonging, you know.
Hungary, yeah.
But clearly Britain is more important, you know.
But do you think Brexit will happen, by the way?
Well, of course, you know, it's, how can you, well, I imagine how many times I have posed myself your question, you know, and the delay of negotiating is a sense of uneasiness. But, you know, how can you go back after referendum?
But it's only 4%, and there was 3.5 million people voted in a protest at the way the campaign was run. But I think the concern is that if we had a general election, that might be nice, but I don't suppose we're going to have one of them. The question is, it's so complicated. TEN-T, the Trans-European Corridors, wonderful success of European Union. What's going to happen with all the TEN-T projects? You know, it's a big question.
Yeah, but how can you, well, I know that the Parliament could say, look, the referendum was only consultative or so on. From the legal point of view, you have many possibilities to go back. But when there is the eternal fighting between the legal aspect, sorry for the lawyers, you know, between legal aspect and the strength of history, history wins.
All the time. But just one thing, just I have to ask you this. We've got this, you say it in the book, we've got this gap with people losing faith in their institutions and the sense of identity and these questions. But then I watched the European Parliament last week. I'm one of these people that actually, over breakfast, watch these things. And you get people like Farage, who is rude. He's not even paying respect to his fellow citizens in the Parliament. You've got Madame Le Pen. You've got the German evolution. You had the clowns here. Are we getting... How are we going to deal with these extreme people who make extreme statements without thinking of the consequences of them?
Well, you are opening another page that is not concerning Europe, but is concerning modern democracy, because Trump is a typical European leader. Look, read the Trump gospel. Immigrants, trade, China, the same type of, and look at the electorate, lower middle class that has been displaced by globalization. No difference in terms of deep values between, you know, and so the problem is how democracy can deliver. Because then, you know, think it over. Why Trump is so successful, even if he loses or not election? Why is so successful? Because he was not in the, let's say, he was not fascist or communist or, you know, it was absolutely anti-establishment. Le Pen, father, when he preserved the fascist roots, let's say, he was keeping just a small part of electorates. The daughter, who from the Freudian point of view killed the father, she immediately, gain it, you know, because she could gain all unhappy people, even the workers of Marseille that his father was impossible to have. And so we have this anti-establishment movement that is the real problem of our democracy, you know. But the problem is, shall we have new leaders able to interpret the change of the world, you know? If you look at that from the Chinese point of view, they think that their superiority is their central decisions, you know. But I love democracy, you know. I want to end with an anecdote. I was talking with one of Chinese intellectuals, you know, and he was telling me, look, how can you, in Europe and even in the United States, run a country? You have everyday elections, local, provincial, regional, national, European, and the United States, these long campaigns, you know. And I said, look, we like elections. And they said, yes, but, and this is the problem, because of demoscopic development, even the smallest local election become of national importance. And so the behavior of your leading people is shorted. And you never think to tomorrow, you always think to today. And the problems are all long-term problems. Education, pensions, even the military aspect, etc. Look, we have to meditate, because I want democracy. I shall never abandon democracy. But we cannot be killed by the short-termism.
Romano, Prodi, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.